one police murder rate. Yet that doesn't have a platform. People aren't listening to, Indigenous voices, and it's largely another epidemic that we would address as Native erasure.
How do you view the relationship between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Indigenous power movement?
I think it's reminiscent of the 60s and 70s, where they kind of identified each other as highly oppressed, and the two groups were, from the get-go, since the birth of this nation, highly abused, highly compromised, and in constant threat of danger. So, as we saw, during civil rights movements, that's been the case again on a mild level, right? Like some of the marches I attended in Seattle would give Indigenous voices a platform, and they would hand over the mic and say, please, come and speak. Yet the white activists, oftentimes, they would fight back just as hard when you called them out about Indigenous issues and erasure. They would get really defensive, and these are people that were showing up hard for Black lives. So it's very interesting, the dynamic as an Indigenous person and an Indigenous activist, how I've been received in different circles. And that's part of the reason I think I did stay out here, was because there was solidarity amongst other native peoples. And I could feel camaraderie. I could feel that I wouldn't be rejected or minimized again in the fight for my people's rights. So it became almost necessary that the fight for me stay here. As much as I am still very passionate about, water rights, this is also a treaty fight. This is also Indigenous sovereignty and human rights when it comes down to that nobody pays attention to the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. So there's a lot wrapped up in the Enbridge pipeline fight in terms of resource extraction being the new genocide.
This is a Native American, Indigenous-led space here. How are you addressing some of the things that gave you pause when you were participating in the Black Lives Matter movement?
Here, there's no bullshit. Tasha has set that precedent so well. Tasha Martineau, obviously we know her as the founder of Camp McGeezy, that there's no, either people know not to test it, or they know to take the education that we are going to give them when they do test it. And if they try to buck that, they're out. So it feels very easy here, that I've got, for one, white allies showing up in this space that have done a lot of work. If they're coming to live at a resistance camp in the middle of northern Minnesota, I can almost guarantee you that they've done a lot of their own education, right? And understood what the Indigenous are fighting for and what climate risk, means in terms of climate protection. But they've been careful to come informed and know how to hold themselves in an Indigenous space. And now we have changed our vetting process to straightforwardly ask those questions right off the bat. So it's more, how do you respond when you've been called in about whiteness and white behavior showing up in BIPOC spaces? Can you take Indigenous leadership? Will you be able to, sit through white accountability without getting defensive and throwing it back? And not to say that we are infallible as Indigenous people, we also fuck up, but we'll also take our cues, when that does happen. But it feels much safer here. I was restricted from chats in the Seattle scene, the protest scene, last January to February for 5 weeks over Native erasure, because it became an issue of that I called out a person who had been very, very active in the chats until I started talking about Native issues, and then they were silent for 3 days while this conversation happened, hopped back in when they saw that they thought it was over. And I addressed that, and they were male-bodied. And I said, as a white male-bodied person, you are the last one that can negate yourself from these topics and these issues. And they said at that point that the reason they hadn't been present was because they were dealing with their own gender. And at that point, it became that I was toxic and abusive and that I was transphobic. And then they needed space from me in the chats for 5 weeks. And when it came to how much it had damaged my psyche and my soul to be removed from a mostly white space, because that's what the activists in Seattle tend to number, I was given a week to have that person gone. So that tells you just the disparagement in terms of how a Native person was treated when they addressed Native erasure in an activist space. And I don't doubt that that same thing has happened to Black people too, and in different parts of the country, or other brown people. But it was really, really hard to swallow that, thinking that I'd finally found community that understood and that we're going to uplift Indigenous voices, and did the same thing that's been happening to us for centuries.
So do you have main goals for what you want Camp McGeezy to look like?
A center for decolonization. And that to me looks like maybe we bring in speakers that have been doing that work, other BIPOC that have been doing decolonization work for decades, or maybe they're new to it, and we pay them to come in and maybe host workshops where people know that they can come here and get that anti-racism and experience it with other white bodies in a place where they know the conversation can be had and they'll still be held and honored in all of that. I've even considered that we would bring in tutors for BIPOC children in the area. I know of a 9-year-old, Native boy that can't read, and that's not an isolated instance. There are other children that are his age and older that can't read, and that are probably very much underperforming for math and English and all of the other things that, as much as we don't want to school them in the American curriculum, they're going to have to know some of that in order to even get a chance or a foot in the door to work themselves out of that #1 poverty rate or that #1 teen suicide rate, to know that they have options, that they have success, or that they have access to success, and that they won't also have to spend their lives in a cycle of trauma, that they can maybe turn that around as adults. And that, we could help sustain that here at Camp McGeezy. And also a place of healing, when the Line 3 fight is over, people, can come here. We're trying to build, during our building event this, 4 days, a BIPOC healing space. And that would look like, just a little center here at camp where BIPOC only, could go and sit, and if they're overstimulated, or if they're sitting with something heavy from an experience that they had with a white person here at camp, they can come in there and be free of that, and process it if they need to. Art supplies, or just comfy pillows, or a massage table, ... whatever that could look like. So that's some of the future. There are also other fights. Tamarack Mine is coming up. That will largely be something we have to address in terms of resource extraction. And then there's the Line 5 fight over in Wisconsin, the Mackinac Straits. Camp McGeezy has been offered a piece of land over there for protest, activity, water protection. So we won't be done just when, this pipe is in the ground and it's all tied off. We will still have work to do here.
Is there something unique about Line 3 or Enbridge that makes this different than other fights?
No, not really. When it comes down to it, our treaties still weren't honored in this fight. The Indigenous voices were ignored. The MCT, which consists of the Minnesota Chippewa tribes, is what that stands for. 3 different reservations here in Minnesota. 2 out of 3 of those tribes were denied their voices being heard, and it all landed on one tribe saying that they gave the go-ahead to Enbridge. So it's still Indigenous being pushed out and or removed from their own land, and bought out or sold, in order for big business, capitalism, white patriarchy, white supremacy to come in and say, we have to do this because it's the best for the rest of everybody else. And it doesn't matter if the indigenous are here or not. You guys are such a small part of the population that we don't need to bother ourselves with you. So it is in the sense that it's like Line 3 runs through Minnesota, Ojibwe territory is big, and there's a bigger center of indigenous here than other tribes. When you travel to reservations throughout the United States, reservations are smaller and smaller, and with that death rate, we have lost more and more indigenous, and it feels like there is a concentration here of indigenous, so that is unique. But for the most part, everything else looks exactly the same as it has for other fights that we've had to take a stand on.
So a lot of what you spoke about in your vision for camp seemed to revolve around transformation, some of it being generational, a lot of it being healing and trauma.
Yeah.
What's your vision for the next generation?
Ooh, that kids know that they have a place that they can come to be safe, or that they'll have access to tools that will keep them safe, and that they'll have the access to the same upward mobility that their white peers in school, have chastised them for or about not having, and that they'll be able to take those tools with them and nurture their families, and we can get a shot at that 8th generation, prophecy, which is that the rainbow tribe, being all colors of the earth in terms of race, will come together to fight for Mother Earth and for the indigenous. And that doesn't mean just the indigenous in America, right? The indigenous all over the globe. So it's that we have a good shot at all of these generations of harm and trauma that have existed for the past 600 years in the Americas, that we have a shot at undoing further harm and making sure that another little boy in Oklahoma doesn't get his braid cut simply because he wears a braid, and he's not held down on a bathroom floor and by 2 white kids, and forced to have to lose that part of his heritage and culture just because he's different. That maybe one day the little girl in Kotzebue, Alaska that goes missing and is found murdered by a school after she'd been raped gets the same amount of attention and media that the Molly Tibbetts gets when they go missing, right? That we have even just an opportunity to try for survival.
Thank you so much for that. You spoke about wanting the next generation to have certain tools. I was wondering if you can think of specific tools that might be in that toolbox.
So for us, that's going to look different than it does in westernized, predominantly white circles, right? For us, that looks like a lodge everywhere we need a lodge, and medicine people practicing our traditional ways in order to heal our indigenous people. It's going to look like more herbal medicine than it does psychiatric medicines, and I take psych meds, for anxiety. It's going to look like being allowed to fish, hunt, skin an animal, regardless if you're on reservation land or not. That you won't just have to be sequestered in this square area on a map to practice who and what you are, or to be protected as a Native person. That you'll be able to leave those bounds and also know that you're safe, which is not the case for Native Americans in this country right now. That you'll be able to bead and do quill work and have that artwork revered just as much as the people that are getting $1 million for their paintings, And it's not about the money. It's about, again, that erasure. When I ask people if they can name 5 major figures in modern day that they can refer to as Native American, be it like a popular chef, a scientist, a politician. Deb Haaland does count, but she didn't when I wrote a paper about this in 2020. She hadn't, I don't think she had won office yet. That if they could name that, and they couldn't, you know, so we're talking about musicians. We're talking about people that make up the fabric of America have so forgotten the Native American that we're not discussed, we're not talked about, we're not in papers, our issues aren't brought up. The Line 3 fight has largely been silent. We shut down a highway in Pennington County up at Red Lake, and had that been a milk truck, you know, that shut down a highway, that would have got media attention. We had 5 counties worth of cops at that Sundance. We held a Sundance. It didn't get a blip. There's something wrong with that, you know? When issues that are Indigenous related, the Governor's Mansion action only a couple weekends ago on Tasha Martineau's birthday, I don't know that ABC or CBS investigated with activists. I know that there was one article that had a quote from a cop, but again, we're not talked about, we're not discussed in the larger diorama of things. So I think that that's also something that could be turned around, and that should be turned around. For the love of God. Like, really? Really? We're not known.
Yeah. How do you feel about all the white people coming here and like learning native traditions and things like that?
I'm elated. To see white bodies show up on the line, it tells me, I mean, these are hardcore activists, you know, like they are coming to stay in the elements. Most of them have come to take a charge, which means take an arrest. And oftentimes these charges are coming with felonies, and we're still fighting them in court. So we're not sure how those are going to land in terms of like, will this be on your future record or not? But the fact that they even showed up to do it in the first place says that we are here. We are going to stand for climate and Indigenous sovereignty. Yes, I do wish there were more Indigenous, because that they aren't here means that either they've felt so scared and afraid to show up and fight that they've been, you know, spiritually beaten that much more, or that they don't have the access to get here. You know, they don't have the means to leave work for a week or a summer. I don't know how I've sustained myself all summer. You know, like it's just been miracle after miracle, or creator, whatever, great spirit, coming in a clinch every time that I'm like, I'm still paying rent, you know, on that sublet back in, now I've got, you know, somebody staying there, but at the same time I still have a car payment, insurance, like I've got bills and I've got to make this work in order to stay in this fight. So I think that that's part of the problem, is that Indigenous don't feel like they can take time off work, and if they were to take time off or leave their families, it would come at the cost of what the end of Standing Rock looked like, which was absolute terror and trauma. We were put in dog cages. We were sprayed with water hoses in sub-0 degree temperatures and left to die, right? And there wasn't a call by even Obama at that time. And I loved that man up until Standing Rock. And I was like, fuck you. After this, you've lost every ounce of respect I have for you. You did not jump in and help the Indigenous when the time was necessary. You let the Native Guard or the National Guard out there. You let them terrorize those people. And that really, really hurt. So I have a feeling, you know, some people are like, I can't go back out to Line 3 if they're Indigenous. And I think that's why we see, you know, more white bodies out here than we do BIPOC. And the BLM movement, right? Those activists, those black activists are busy in their hometowns with those movements. They finally have a platform. They're finally being heard. If they were to walk away from their fight right now, there's I'm sure a fear that they would feel like they would lose that stronghold and people would forget all over again. And then they would go back to number 2 murder rate by police.
I am curious if you're comfortable, if you would talk more about maybe like some of the divisions, like, you know, at the protest yesterday, we saw counter protesters from Fond du Lac.
Oof. Okay, so we've been marginalized so much that when you finally get a taste of what upward mobility looks like, you're probably not going to let it go. And in these smaller communities where they are very insular, if you speak up against, even though you know it's the right thing to do, you're going to be ostracized. You're going to face racism, and you actually might be physically harmed, and so will your family. I don't excuse the natives that are pro-pipeline in this area, but I understand it. The protests, or the people that don't like us that are white, they can go fuck themselves. Really, we're talking about chuds, right? Like, so we're talking about people that are largely disconnected. They don't understand the BIPOC perspective. They don't care to learn, and when you do sit down and spend time to educate them, they revert right back to whiteness. So if they want to sit and have those discussions, I absolutely will. And I've done a lot of educating for absolutely free for the survival of my people that I shouldn't be doing, but all just so we have a chance, a fighting chance. That said, you know, their disdain with us does come with their racism. And we do have supporters though, you know, and I just try to like hold on to, we walked up to Duluth Street Bakery yesterday and asked them outright, like, can we dumpster in your dumpster? I don't usually dumpster. I haven't like picked up that part of leftism yet. But I was like, let's try it and see, because I remember being with other comrades that had done that at that spot, and we got a good haul that day. And I asked them, and they were like, absolutely, we got a shit ton of food here that we're gonna give to you. We came out with a whole bag of, you know, loaves of bread and cinnamon rolls and like pecan sticky rolls. All that to say that we do have people that understand our cause. I mean, I was wearing a shirt that had like a woman weaving the anarchy sign into a blanket on it. So you can only see representation like that and decide right then and there if you're with us or you're against us. And they were with us. So I try to focus more on, you know, that there are people out there that don't hate our guts, that understand what we're doing. Our wood guy that we've been buying these 2x6s from, this guy is like, if you guys need help, I can drive him out to you. And he lives here in rural Minnesota, way back in the woods. You would think that he was a hermit, and here he is offering to like run supplies up to this resistance camp that's just up the street from where he lives. And he has a lot of, you know, he could have a lot of privilege as a white male, not speaking up and not doing anything for the indigenous, yet here he is willing to help us. So that feels really powerful and liberating, and also hopeful, you know, that one day we're gonna get them all, and they'll understand where we're coming from.
Matter! Black lives what?
Black Lives Matter!
Native lives what?
Are there any things that like you'd like to add?
Please pay attention to the residential school phenomenon. That
Yeah. I see your shirt.
Oh, yeah, yep. Boarding school dropouts. So this I actually ordered before Kamloops, which is a school up in Canada, was found to have 215 bodies buried on its grounds. And at the time I was like, oh man, that's a funny shirt. And then I went back to get it in July because I left my home where I had ordered all of this like indigenous, you know, merchandise, and almost felt bad putting it back on. But I was like, no, this also needs to be discussed. So the shirt is snarky. The residential school epidemic is very serious in that before I came out here, I think 2 weeks before I came out here, they found the first 215 at Kamloops. And ever since then, Canada has done an investigation across their lands and found, I think we're up to 1,500 now. Deb Haaland said that we were going to do the same here in America, and not one school has been searched. Rosebud Sioux started a search at Carlisle Reservation or residential school 5 years ago. They finally got their specific bodies that are true to their tribe back this year. And what residential schools are, they would essentially be concentration camps. There's no difference. They, Native children in the 1800s were kidnapped from their families, literally ripped from moms and dads and uncles and aunties. And when they fought, those people were beat back and dogs were sicked on them. And those children were stolen and sent hundreds of miles away, sometimes, to residential schools. And these residential schools were assimilation factories where we were taught that we couldn't speak our languages, we couldn't wear our clothes, we couldn't practice any of our cultures or traditions. We had to learn Christianity because at the time we were looked at as savages, and that if we did anything outside of that, we were beaten, we were starved anyway, and we were beaten anyway, oftentimes raped. There are many stories of teenage girls that were raped by priests, forced to carry those babies to term. Upon delivery, those babies were taken right from that mother and thrown into, ovens downstairs. And you can still, they can still hear the screams of those infants, as they were burning to death, so that the nuns and the priests could hide their crimes. So, with that also came disease, flu epidemics, smallpox, measles epidemics would, rampage these schools. And instead of sending those babies home to their families, they just left them on the school grounds like they were trash. They didn't matter. They didn't get a choice in where they were going to lay to rest. And their families don't get to pray for them like white people get to pray at cemeteries for their loved ones. And the silence around that topic here in America has been deafening. I post about it probably once a week, once every 2 weeks, and I think I eventually stopped because it wasn't being received and people weren't doing anything about it. So it's much like my MMIW folder that I was putting 1 to 2 mostly women in every week on Facebook that, again, nobody shared, nobody talked about, that I just became crestfallen and really heartbroken I couldn't share anymore. So if people could really start to pay attention to that we want to find our families, those dead bodies, and make sure that they get home to their reservations, and make sure that you invest in whatever initiative. If there isn't an initiative happening, that you start the initiative, that you say, I am a descendant of a colonizer, or I'm an immigrant to this country, and I care enough about the freedom and the life I have here in America that I will do whatever it takes to make sure that those bodies get home, to pay forward all of that freedom that was given to me from the natives that it was stolen from. If you can't do anything else in terms of native causes, help us find our kids and get them back. That's the only other thing I think I'd say.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yep.